Have you ever wondered what it takes to survive where even the fiercest predators fear to tread? What would you do if you were alone on a planet where every shadow hides a hunter and the very ground beneath you is alive with danger? Would you fight? Would you run? Or could you learn to thrive in a world that seems designed to break you? On Kolvar 9, the ninth world in the outer reaches of the Nixon system, survival was not just a challenge, it was a daily war. The planet was a sprawling expanse of jagged rocks, dense alien jungles, and deep ravines where creatures unknown lurked in the dark. The apex predator of this world, the Shadowfang, was a beast whispered about in legends and feared by every native life form. Its sleek black scales shimmered in the dim light. Its claws could slice through the toughest armor, and its senses were sharp enough to detect the faintest movement from miles away. No one lived long after crossing paths with the Shadowfang, except for one man, Jack Tyler, a survivor. Unlike any other, Jack had arrived on Kolvar 9 months ago when a covert military transport crashed during a mission gone wrong. Left for dead and presumed lost, he faced the unforgiving wilderness armed with only his training, his wits, and an unyielding will to live. The locals never expected to see a human outlast a single day, let alone thrive, hunting the deadliest creature on their planet. But Jack did more than survive. He hunted the Shadowfangs one by one, mastering their habits, learning their weaknesses, and turning the hunter into the hunted. The night was thick with the scent of damp earth and alien flora as Jack sat by the flickering glow of a small campfire, his hands busy preparing the evening meal from the remains of a recently defeated Shadowfang. The firelight danced across his weathered face, revealing scars that told stories of battles fought and won. The crackling flames cast long shadows on the rocky outcrop where a figure watched silently. Velna Kai, leader of the Nixon Huntress squad, had tracked the unusual energy signatures emanating from the crash site and the strange signs of activity in the area. Her mission was clear: find the intruder, eliminate the threat, and restore balance to the ecosystem. But when she arrived at the outskirts of Jack's camp and saw him calmly cooking the flesh of their most feared predator, she hesitated. For the first time in her career, she faced a being who did not fear her or the Shadowfangs, and who held an air of quiet confidence that unsettled even her. Velna was tall and lithe, her skin a deep indigo marked with swirling tribal tattoos that glowed faintly under the planet's twin moons. Her eyes sharp and calculating, but behind that gaze was a mind trained to command and to survive. The meeting between Jack and Velna was not one of hostility, but of cautious curiosity, as they both sensed in each other something unexpected. A sudden surge of electrical energy split the sky, and a violent storm swept across the landscape, forcing the two adversaries to seek shelter together in an ancient stone refuge built long before the Nixon colonized the planet. As thunder roared outside and the walls trembled, Jack and Velna found themselves bound not only by circumstance, but by a mutual respect that neither fully understood. Yet inside the shelter the air was thick with tension and the scent of wet stone, but also with a fragile sense of companionship. Jack shared stories of Earth, his homeland full of vast oceans and endless skies, while Velna recounted tales of her people, the fierce hunters of Kolvar 9, bound by tradition and honor. Their words bridged worlds and built a connection that was stronger than the threat outside. The night deepened, and so did their bond as they prepared to face whatever dangers the storm would bring. But in the quiet moments between the raging tempest, they began to realize that survival on Kolvar 9 was not just about strength or skill. It was about trust and understanding between two beings from worlds apart. And so the story of Jack Taylor and Velna Kai began not as enemies but as allies in a fight for life and perhaps something more. What happens when two souls forged in fire find solace in each other? Will the harsh wilderness of Kolvar 9 break them apart? Or will it forge a bond that transcends the stars? Stay with me as we dive deeper into this tale of survival, love, and the unexpected ways we find connection in the darkest places. The night after the storm had passed, the shelter was quiet except for the faint drip of water seeping through cracks in the ancient stone walls. Jack sat near the fire, sharpening a blade with slow, deliberate strokes. Velna watched him from across the room, her arms folded, eyes narrowing. Not with suspicion, but curiosity. She had never seen a human like this before, calm in the face of danger, almost indifferent to fear. "How do you do it?" she finally asked, her voice low, carrying the weight of countless battles. "How do you survive when everything here is trying to kill you?" Jack looked up, the firelight reflecting in his tired eyes. "You learn to understand the world, not just fight it," he said. "You listen to the signs, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig. You know when to hide and when to strike." Velna tilted her head, absorbing his words. "But the shadow fangs, they are the apex predators here. Even we fear them." Jack smiled faintly. "Fear doesn't keep you alive. Sometimes it's knowing what you're afraid of and using that knowledge to your advantage." The two shared a silence heavy with unspoken respect. It was a lesson in survival, but it was also the beginning of something more. An unspoken understanding bridging two very different worlds. Have you ever had to face a fear so big it seemed impossible to overcome? What would you do if your survival depended on it? As the fire crackled softly, Velna stepped closer, examining the blade Jack was sharpening. "That's not an ordinary blade," she said. "Where did you get it?" Jack shrugged. "A keepsake from Earth. It saved my life more times than I can count." Velna's eyes softened for a moment. Maybe survival isn't just about fighting monsters outside. Maybe it's about holding on to pieces of who you are. Suddenly, a distant howl echoed through the night, the unmistakable call of a shadow fang pack closing in. Velna stiffened and grabbed her weapon. Jack's expression hardened, but instead of reaching for his blade, he stood and extended a hand toward her. "Come on," he said calmly. "We'll face them together." They moved swiftly through the shelter's narrow corridors toward a hidden exit. Jack led with quiet confidence, using his knowledge of the land and its creatures to navigate the safest paths. Velna followed closely, trusting this human who had survived what she thought impossible. As they slipped into the darkness outside, Velna glanced at Jack. "Why didn't you just run like everyone else?" Jack's answer was simple. "Because sometimes you have to stand your ground. Because sometimes the fight is worth it." The night air was thick with tension as the sounds of the hunting pack grew nearer, but with Jack beside her, Velna felt a strength she hadn't known she needed. A reminder that survival was not just a solitary battle, but a shared journey. What would you do if you found an unlikely ally in the most dangerous place? Would you trust them? Would you fight with them? Together they faced the night. Two warriors from different worlds, united against a common threat, learning that sometimes the fiercest battles forge the strongest bonds. The howling wind was the first warning. Low and eerie, it swept through the jagged rocks like a predator itself, stirring the alien foliage into a frenzy. Jack and Velna barely had time to react. The Shadowfang pack, drawn by the scent of blood and the stir of the storm, was closing in fast. Velna's hand instinctively went to her weapon, her fingers tightening around the grip. Jack grabbed a handful of dirt, mixing it with dried leaves and the remnants of a strange purple fungus he'd found earlier. He crushed it into a fine powder and lit it with a spark from his flint. Smoke began to billow, thick and pungent. "Smoke," Jack said, his voice steady despite the tension. "They hate it, blinds their senses." Velna nodded, impressed despite herself. She watched as the shadows grew larger, the pack's growls becoming an ominous chorus around them. Together they scrambled to position themselves near the shelter's entrance. Jack's eyes were sharp, every muscle primed to react. Velna's stance was firm, her breath measured despite the storm raging outside. As the first Shadowfang lunged, Jack tossed the smoking powder into its face. The creature yelped and recoiled, momentarily disoriented. Velna seized the moment, launching herself forward with a swift strike. Her blade slicing through thick scales. They moved as one. Jack setting traps with cunning precision, Velna delivering lethal blows. Each breath, each move was a dance of survival. Their skills complemented each other, two worlds converging in the heat of battle. After what felt like an eternity, the remaining Shadowfangs retreated, their howls fading into the storm. Velna lowered her weapon, breathing heavily but with a newfound respect. She looked at Jack and asked, "How did you learn to fight like this?" "It's unlike anything I've seen from your kind." Jack gave a dry laugh, wiping sweat from his brow. "When you've got no choice, you learn, fast, and sometimes you have to think like the thing you're fighting." The storm began to subside, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. Have you ever faced a danger so great that your only option was to trust someone completely? How did that trust change you? Velna glanced around the battered shelter, then back at Jack. "We survived tonight because we worked together. Maybe this is the start of something neither of us expected." Jack nodded. "Maybe, but the night is still young, and this planet still holds many dangers." As the first rays of dawn pierced the storm clouds, they prepared to face whatever came next, united, wary, and somehow hopeful. The morning sun filtered weakly through the thick canopy of alien leaves, casting dappled shadows on the worn path that wound through the dense jungle of Kolvar 9. Jack moved with purpose, every step measured, every sense alert. Velna followed closely, still trying to reconcile the man beside her with the legends and fears she'd been taught since childhood. Jack's survival wasn't luck. It was instinct, sharpened by years of training and hardened by necessity. But more than that, it was something deeper, a quality that set humans apart from even the most resilient of creatures. You ever wonder why humans can keep going, even when everything's against them? Jack asked, breaking the silence as they made their way toward an old communication relay station, one of the few links to the outside universe still operational on the planet. Velna looked at him, curious but cautious. "It's not just about strength or weapons, is it?" Jack shook his head. It's about will. The will to endure, to adapt, to keep moving even when hope feels like a distant memory. Velna studied the scars etched across his hands and arms. "You carry a heavy weight." Jack smiled, a fleeting, tired expression. "We all do, but some of us learn to turn that weight into purpose." As they navigated through tangled vines and unseen threats, Jack explained how he had learned to read the subtle signs of the jungle, the faintest shifts in the wind, the subtle breaks in the earth, the softest rustle that hinted at the presence of a predator. Survival isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing when to be still, when to listen, and when to strike, he said. You can't just be strong, you have to be smart. Velna nodded, absorbing every word. Her respect for this man who lived by his own rules deepened with each step. Have you ever had to rely on something inside yourself you didn't know you had? How did that change the way you face challenges? They paused by a clearing where the air was thick with the scent of strange flowers and damp earth. Jack pointed to the horizon, where faint signals from the relay flickered like distant stars. We'll use that to call for backup, or maybe just to let someone know we're still alive, he said. Velna glanced toward the signals, then back at Jack. For the first time, I believe survival here isn't just about fighting the monsters outside. It's about fighting the ones within. The jungle around them hummed with life and danger, but together they moved forward. Two warriors from different worlds, united by a fragile but growing bond. The night settled over Kolvar 9 like a heavy, silent blanket. The sky was clear, revealing a tapestry of unfamiliar stars shimmering coldly above the dense alien jungle. In the shelter, beneath the fragile glow of a makeshift fire, Jack and Velna sat close enough that their shoulders brushed, but neither spoke a word. There was no grand confession, no sudden declarations. Just the quiet crackling of flames and the rhythmic breath of two warriors, both scarred and wary, but slowly letting down their defenses. Velna broke the silence first, her voice soft but steady. "You fought well today." Jack chuckled, a low sound that seemed almost foreign in this place. "I'm not sure if it was skill or luck." She smiled faintly, watching the way the firelight flickered in his eyes. "Luck's just another word for preparation." They shared a look that spoke volumes, an unspoken understanding forged not by words but by shared experience. As the fire warmed the cold night air, Jack pulled out a protein bar, torn at the edges and wrapped in crinkled foil. He offered it to Velna, who took it with a raised eyebrow. "You eat this stuff?" He shrugged. "Sometimes. When there's nothing else." Velna took a bite, grimacing slightly at the bland taste. "You humans really don't know how to spice things up." Jack laughed softly. "Sometimes you don't need flavor. You just need company." A silence settled again, but this one was different. Lighter, warmer, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you forget, just for a moment, that the world outside is a constant fight. Have you ever shared a moment with someone that changed how you saw everything else? A quiet moment that meant more than words ever could? Velna looked up at the ceiling of the shelter, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect this, not here, not with you." Jack met her gaze, eyes reflecting the firelight and something softer beneath. "Neither did I." Outside, the wind picked up again, but inside, the storm was over. For now. As they settled in for the night, Velna rested her head lightly against Jack's shoulder. There was no promise, no future planned, only a fragile connection born in the most unlikely of places. And as the stars watched silently overhead, two souls from different worlds found a fleeting peace, a momentary truce in a war that had no end. The message came through the comms terminal with no warning, a cold, clinical directive from the Nixon High Command. Subject Jack Taylor classified as high risk. Eliminate to prevent further ecological disruption. Termination protocol authorized. Velna stared at the cold text, the glow of the terminal reflecting in her storm-dark eyes. Her breath caught in her throat. This was the moment she'd dreaded. The very order she'd feared, ever since that first night by the fire. She was the best hunter, the finest soldier the Nixon had, trained to obey without question, to act with precision and without hesitation. But this was different. Jack was no longer just a target. He was a man who had survived unimaginable dangers, a man who had shared his stories, his scars, and, most importantly, his quiet strength with her. Could she betray everything she had become? Could she end the one being who had shown her the fragile beauty and humanity? Velna's fingers hovered over the console, trembling. The cold orders seemed to burn beneath her skin, demanding compliance. Yet, in her mind, a storm raged louder than any command. Memories of Jack's steady gaze, the way he had offered her that bitter protein bar, the silent moments of trust growing between them. Her heart, a word she seldom allowed herself to use, whispered in defiance. What would you do if the one you were ordered to destroy was the only reason you still believed in something better? The question hung heavy in the dimly lit room. She reached out, disconnected the link remotely. The flicker of neural data ceased. Then, with a deliberate calm that betrayed none of the turmoil within, Velna crafted her report. Subject terminated during extraction procedure. Biological samples destroyed. No anomalies detected. Her superior would believe it. No one would question her. But the truth was a shadow she carried alone. Later, when the station quieted and the hum of machinery faded, Velna stood at the observation window. She traced the stars with her finger. Distant, cold, yet infinitely mysterious. A soft sound caught her attention. A melody faint but unmistakable, drifting through the corridors. It was the same song she had heard that first night. The one that had unsettled her. The one that had woven memories into her mind. A tear escaped her eye, unbidden and unrestrained. Do you think love can survive in a place built for war? She whispered to the void, hoping the answer might come back on the wind. Have you ever faced a choice between duty and what your heart knows is right? What would you do if following orders meant betraying the one person who changed everything? The storm was far from over, but Velna had made her choice, and the consequences were just beginning to unfold. The jungle around them was alive with whispers, the subtle crackle of leaves, the distant calls of creatures both seen and unseen. But none was as loud as the pounding of their hearts as Jack and Velna prepared for what would be the fiercest battle of their lives. The Shadowfang pack had grown restless. After their failed attempt to breach the shelter, the predators had multiplied and evolved, sensing a new kind of threat, one they had never encountered, the strange alliance of man and Nixon warrior. Velna checked her weapons, her fingers steady despite the electric tension in the air. Jack moved silently, setting traps and marking paths with precision born of survival. They had no illusions. Tonight was not about retreat. It was about proving themselves worthy of the wild they both called home. The first wave came without warning, a blur of black scales and glowing eyes, slicing through the underbrush like a living storm. Velna's blade sang in the night as she met the attack head-on, her strikes efficient and brutal. Jack flanked the creatures, luring them into snares lined with razor-sharp vines coated in paralytic sap. Each movement was calculated, each breath measured. In the chaos, trust blossomed. Not spoken, but felt in the synchronization of their actions. Velna covered Jack's back without hesitation. Jack saved Velna from a lethal swipe with lightning reflexes. Minutes stretched like hours. The last of the pack retreated into the shadows, their snarls fading but their presence still haunting the clearing. Velna dropped to her knees, exhaustion overtaking her battle-ready composure. Jack sat beside her, offering a silent hand. They didn't need words. They had fought not just for survival, but for each other. Have you ever found strength in someone when you thought you had none left? Who was that person for you? As dawn broke, painting the jungle in hues of gold and green, they sat side by side, their bond sealed in fire and blood. Velna looked at Jack with something new, respect mixed with an unfamiliar softness. You are more than a survivor, Jack. You are a force of nature. Jack smiled, a rare, genuine smile, and you're the fiercest partner I've ever had. They knew the war was far from over. The predators would return, and so would the challenges, but together they had become something neither expected, a symbol of hope and unity on a planet ruled by fear. The jungle around them whispered again, but this time it carried a different message. A message of resilience, of alliance, and maybe, just maybe, of love. Velna stepped off the shuttle onto the cold metal platform of the Nixon Capitol, the weight of silence heavier than any armor she had ever worn. The familiar buzz of the city felt distant, as if she were a ghost returning to a place that no longer remembered her name. Jack was gone. She hadn't seen him since that last battle in the jungle, the fight where they stood side by side against the Shadowfangs. The mission had shifted. The council demanded results, and in their eyes Jack was a liability. But Velna had made her choice. She let him escape. Now, as she walked through the sterile halls of command, she felt the eyes of her comrades and superiors bore into her, a mixture of suspicion, disappointment, and silent accusation. Her report was precise and cold. Subject: Jack Taylor escaped during extraction. Termination failed. Biological sample lost. No one questioned the words, but Velna knew the truth. The cost she had paid in silence and shadows. Back in her quarters, Velna hung a small trophy on the wall, a piece of Shadowfang hide, soft and dark, a reminder of the man who had taught her to see strength beyond blood and steel. Sometimes, late at night, she would find a small package waiting for her. A bar of the protein ration Jack had offered, wrapped carefully in dried leaves. She never sent a reply. But every time she held that simple gift, she remembered the nights by the fire, the quiet moments of trust, and the feeling that survival was no longer just about living, but about carrying memories. Do you believe some people leave marks not with words or victories, but with the way they make us feel? Velna never forgot Jack. Not because he was a soldier or a survivor, but because he had shown her the power of something she had been taught to ignore: hope. Her life continued, but a part of her always wandered the wilds of Culver 9, searching for a man who had become more than a myth, more than a legend. He was her reminder that even in the harshest places, even when all seemed lost, the heart could find a way to endure. And to you listening now, have you ever held on to a memory that gave you strength when all else failed? Leave a comment below, share your story, because some memories deserve to be remembered. The stars above Culver 9 shone silently, but for those who dared to listen, they whispered a story of survival, sacrifice, and a bond forged beyond worlds. And that story lives on.